Jordan has been talking here about training for a safe and injury-free workplace. I'd like to talk about the way that I deliver safety training. It's a bit different than the way that I deliver other types of training, and that's mostly due to timing. Specifically, I like to front-load my health and safety information when I'm sharing information with planters. Now, you're probably wondering why timing matters. Well, let me tell you about a typical new planter, if there is such a thing. Number one, the planter's hired a few months before the season starts, if we're lucky. She or he is super keen, they want to learn. I call this the sponge stage of their development because they want to soak stuff in. They're curious about everything that you want to throw at them. So this is the time that you want to give them things that you really want them to learn because they're still wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, open-minded. Okay. Number two, many of you have various types of in-house training programs. And for interior operations, most of this stuff starts in March or early April and typically uses distance learning or online training. Even closer to the season, you probably have some sort of in-house rookie training school. And this may include 3 or 4 days even of perhaps a classroom component at the start, and then a few days of practical hands-on training in a field just outside of town. So this is where the amount of information being thrown at a planter starts to make them realize there's a lot to learn here. They start to lose focus, and they start to lose enthusiasm about everything except the actual process of planting a tree. The next important stage is that first week of the season in camp. By this point, the new planters are being overwhelmed with information, and a lot of it doesn't stick. The planters are tired of having to sit through briefings, and they tune out a lot of what you've been saying. So you've all given crew meetings where everyone, they have that 1,000-yard stare, and you know that everything that you're saying to them, they're not paying attention to a word you're saying. So a lot of people consider health and safety to be boring. Many of you in the audience probably feel the same way, right? For you, organizing logistics is more exciting. For a planter, putting a tree in the ground is more exciting. Those things directly affect your earnings, right? Well, health and safety can have a huge impact on your earnings too. So if you're going to teach something boring, like health and safety, you need to put it up front. You'll have a bigger impact, you'll have more retention, and those eager young minds are still open. So here's how I share my health and safety information. Number one, I try to hire early, if possible. This gives me more time to work through the preseason training at a somewhat relaxed pace. Now, obviously, it's not going to work with everyone. You always have some last-minute hires, mid-April, and you're having to throw all this sort of stuff at them really quickly, day after day. But ideally, if you can try and hire early, you can space this stuff out so you get better uptake. Now, I have a series of modules which I share, and again, I try to space them out a few weeks apart if possible. So my preseason modules are broken down in the following order. I have 4 different sections, basically. Number one, health and safety general overview. Basically, all this is my 2 chapters from Step by Step about health and safety training. This information has to be shared earliest. Not only does it mean that it'll have the maximum possible impact, it also shows that health and safety is the number 1 priority at your company. Now, that's not enough because you have to follow up on an ongoing basis. You have to live that mantra, but I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Module number 2 that I share, Fit to Plant, Delia Roberts through Selkirk University. So this is a combination of some preseason physical conditioning, and it also has some information about proper nutrition. It's online, it's free, great resource, you can all use it. Module number 3, tendonitis prevention information from Total Physio. Now, I believe Mike and Jared are presenting later today. Anyway, this stuff, fantastic information. It's had a huge change in our industry in just the past 2 years, so take advantage of it. Very, very worthwhile. And then finally, the 4th module that I move into is information about camp and equipment and what to expect during the first week of work. And to be honest, that's an afterthought. They're going to learn this information anyway when they show up, so it's not really a priority. It's usually mid-April by the time I start sharing this information. So I should point out that even if you put health and safety information up front, you're not done with it. Health and safety issues need to be brought up constantly throughout the season so people don't forget things. So by starting with health and safety, though, you've shown where your priorities are. So why do you think it was worthwhile for me to fly 5,000 kilometers out here yesterday, all the way from Nova Scotia, just to talk to you for 20 minutes about safety? Well, why do I think it's important for our industry? Think about this. Safety management is something that some managers ignore when they're budgeting. But yet, at the same time, it has a huge impact on our bottom lines. So if I can teach you something that reduces the number of claims at your company, then that helps reduce our overall experience in the industry. It helps reduce our WorkSafe industry rate. If that happens, we all have more money to spend on better equipment, to increase tree prices, and ultimately, if that happens, I benefit. So many of us are competitors. It's easy for us to mingle together, smile, act civil as a group. Deep down, we're slightly distrustful of each other sometimes, and we're selfishly worried about what's best for our own companies. Health and safety should be an exception to this. Our WorkSafe contributions are impacted by our performance as a group. So we need to learn that we're going to sink or swim together. Now, during the viewing season this past fall, we saw what we were able to achieve in terms of pricing when we actually tried to work together. And on a side note, you're going to hear more from me on that topic eventually, because I do think we need to see further price increases in 2020, but that's not part of this conversation. Anyway, it's going to be even easier for us to work together in terms of safety than it was for pricing, because we're not competing against each other in that area. We're like a gaggle of geese flying in the same direction, so we can draft off of each other as we migrate to a better future. Better training leads to better safety outcomes. Let's take a look at three things as they relate to actual delivery. So, timing. I've already mentioned that with respect to timing, earlier is better. Information shared in January, February, and March is received with more interest and absorbed more readily than information shared in in April or May. Also, if you're talking about rookies, probably greater than 50% of our industry's new planters are in college or university. Any information that you distribute in April, basically it gets completely ignored by them because they're in exams. Number two, money and costs. Emails are free. Your only cost is a few hours of labor, making sure everyone gets the important information. Now, let me give you a 5-minute tip right now that's going to have a huge return. When you go back to your motel rooms this evening, take 5 minutes, email your crew leaders, camp supervisors, and say, tell all of your planters that it's mandatory for them to buy a copy of Step by Step, and tell them that we're going to quiz them shortly about the health and safety information in the book. Include the book on your required equipment list for new planters: bags, shovel, plot cord, safety whistle, Step by Step. That email is not going to cost you a penny. You're offloading the cost onto the planters. So it's going to give part of your workforce immediate access to a large amount of useful health and safety info. Now, the good thing about this, the planters are going to benefit from buying the book. You know, there's one full chapter about productivity. There's all sorts of stuff about productivity, actually. And you know, for $39 buying the book, if they plant one extra box all summer because of that book, they're making their money back. In the meantime, they're getting all this information which benefits your companies. Methodology, here's another pro tip for you. You can do a half-hour phone, Skype, or FaceTime interview with every planter in the preseason to actually talk to them about health and safety one-on-one. And I don't mean offloading this to the foreman. The foremen are already doing these conversations. I mean you, as upper management, should take the time to talk to your planters. This gives you an opportunity to directly explain your commitment to doing things the right way. It lets you quiz them informally to see what they know and what they need to learn. You can ask if they're following the Fit to Plant program. You can ask if they're doing any sort of pre-season conditioning. This technique works with vets too, not just rookies. So the advantage of this last tip, it goes directly back to Jordan's earlier point about avoiding deliverables that only result in ticking off a checkbox without worker evaluation. We want to move forward to interactions that allow you to informally assess competency. So, if any of you watched Black Mirror and saw the Bandersnatch episode just before New Year's, you understand the concept of a choose-your-own-adventure book, where you've got timeline options. Well, a phone call takes advantage of that same concept. It lets you personally guide the conversation on the fly instead of taking a cookie-cutter approach to delivering content. I can't emphasize strongly enough how important it is to stay connected with your workforce. Not only does it enhance the success of your training, it also builds loyalty because your workforce feels more connected to you, puts a face to the name, lets you talk to them one-on-one. And as an aside, it's a great opportunity to scoop up some competitive intelligence by asking your employees about gossip they've heard through the grapevine. It lets you correct myths about your own company and fix perceptions that are incorrect. It helps build the goodwill in your company, basically. But make sure you have a notepad by the phone while you're making these calls. A lot of important points will come up during these conversations. Going back to my earlier comment about email is free, remember that you want to interact, not just deliver. So you need to follow up. Make it a two-way street. Static training on a website is a one-way street. Now, web training is cost-effective, and it's useful, so I'm not saying disregard that, but it's only one component of a comprehensive training program. Web-based training usually falls more into the category of cover your ass, due diligence, rather than assessing true competency, unless perhaps you incorporate quiz-based questions. So let's ignore the big 13 for a minute. And by big 13, I mean the biggest 13 companies in the industry. So Apex, Blue Collar, Brinkman, Celtic, Coast Range, Dynamic, Folklore, NGR, Rhino, Seneca, Summit, Spectrum, Windfirm. I don't know how many trees those 13 companies account for, probably at least 60%. Let's ignore them for a minute. Let's talk about the smaller companies. So many of you here in the audience do run smaller companies, and you have very few rookies. You shouldn't overlook the value of this same type of preseason training with your vets. Even vet-heavy companies can benefit from having the owner schedule a half-hour call with each employee during the preseason. I promise you, it won't be a waste of time. It's not a sunk cost. So what if your conversation somehow, directly or indirectly, results in eliminating even one safety incident at your company this season? Many of you know that a single reported incident, it can easily eat up 4 to 8 hours of your time. Filling out paperwork, talking to the employee that was involved, talking to the client. And then there's also more direct costs, perhaps modified work duty. There's indirect costs if your work-safe compensation rate goes up, contribution rate goes up. So I'm sure that all of you are eager to avoid these costs. I firmly believe the time spent in the preseason talking to employees helps to reduce the amount of time that you waste during the season dealing with incidents. And none of us can afford wasted time during the season. So better training equals a better bottom line. I've talked about training rookies, and I've talked about interacting with vets. It's also important not to overlook more senior employees. Your foremen are role models, and there's a transfer of competency. Train them properly, and in turn, they'll help mentor less experienced employees. There are a lot of woefully undertrained middle management staff out there, and it's obvious when you look at social media. When the latest version of Step by Step came out, the first thing that I did was ask each of my own foremen who had seen the previous year's edition, I asked them if they wanted a free copy. I know if I give better training to my own crew leaders, that knowledge and their practical competencies will trickle down to a wider planter base. So as I wrap up, I'd like to reiterate that my viewpoint is that our preseason health and safety training information, our programs, those are the #1 tools for potential improvement within our industry. I think that by helping each other, we help ourselves. And that's why this afternoon's conference theme is such an important one for us to concentrate on when we return to our offices next week. We're all going to be run ragged during March and April. Make sure you make an effort, dedicate a significant portion of February to health and safety preseason training at your company. If you can excel in those areas, you're going to have more successful and more profitable companies, and we're all going to come out ahead. Thank you.